All right, what's going on there, fellas? I know most of you, if you like my channel, are on a bit of a quest to get strong. If you've been around the channel, you've heard me say the talking points a million times. That right now, the biggest thing that separates you from someone who lifts more than you on most of the main lifts that you're looking at is going to be just the fact that they have more muscle. So early on in our training career, our training is going to look a little bit more varied, and we're going to place a greater emphasis on general hypertrophy training. As we get more advanced and as we kind of fill out our weight class, our training is going to look a little bit more and a little bit more like many of the advanced lifters that we follow on Instagram, whose training might look very specific. One of the many reasons they need to have that high specificity to get better, but also earlier in their training career, they were probably doing a little bit more general training. Whether that was by design or they just started in football and that was their first couple years of lifting was a little bit more general, not by some grand design, but that is how it worked out, and it worked out quite well for them. And now they're towards the upper limit of their weight class, so more or less the amount of muscle they have is what they're working with. They're not going to be putting on huge amounts of lean tissue. So they've got a fixed machine, so they're going to really hone as much as they can express with that given machine through high specificity training. Most of us either aren't in the right weight class yet or are nowhere near filling out our weight class with as much muscle as possible. So our training is going to change a little bit to reflect that. Now, a lot of this hypertrophy is going to come from taking the lifts that you want to be strong at and training them in hypertrophy relevant rep ranges. So one of the best ways to get your squatting muscles bigger is to squat for sets of 8. Same thing on the bench press, same thing on the deadlift, same thing on the overhead press, the same thing on the weighted pull-up, right? We can use phasic training. So we have a period of time where most of our work on our main lift is going to be done in like hypertrophy relevant rep ranges. Let's just call it 6 to 10. Maybe you take that higher, maybe you don't, right? Maybe more advanced athletes aren't taking their rep ranges up that high, but maybe we should in more of a traditional periodized approach where we have these dedicated phases of higher reps, medium reps, lower reps on our main lift. One's kind of just doing the same rep range every single week once the gains from that kind of peter out a little bit. So that's where we're going to be getting a lot of our hypertrophy from. But the other thing we can do is to identify some key background training that's going to correlate with growing the muscles that help us be good at that lift. And for the most part, early in our training career, we're going to do that almost year round. Even if we're running through even a competition peak until pretty close, we're still going to be working on hypertrophy because that's one of the easiest ways we can get stronger is to get bigger. So we have these background hypertrophy workouts that are going to be working on the muscles that correlate with whatever our goals are. For a competitive powerlifter, that's the squat, bench, deadlift. You'll often see weightlifters squat a lot, right? Weightlifters don't compete in the squat. It's because the squat correlates with physical qualities that has been observed time and time again to correlate with good weightlifting results. So while it's not a competitive exercise, it's something that we do because we know that it builds our machine. We can build up our machine and then apply our specific training and get skilled at expressing it. But a bigger machine usually makes lifting big weights a lot easier, especially if we're a not competitive athlete. Usually people aren't weighing everybody in at the gym when they're looking at how much everybody's benching. They just see the weight on the bar. They don't know that you might just be a weight class heavier than that guy. All they know is you're doing 3 plates and he's doing 275, right? So this is something that we're going to use to our advantage, right? Just like how I said, the weightlifter will often squat a lot of the year, especially early in their training. They might back off once they reach levels of strength on the squat and levels of leg development that are kind of like topped out for all intents and purposes. Okay, we've kind of run that one dry. I don't need to squat more to snatch and clean and jerk more. Maybe I should dedicate more training economy to the snatch and the clean and jerk. We can run through these mini bodybuilding workouts for the 3 most common exercises most of you guys are interested in. If you guys like this video, we can do this kind of type of deal for some other lifts, whether that be strongman events, whether that be other gym lifts you guys are interested in. But here are some brief little hypertrophy workouts that I like. There's nothing magical about these. These are only some of the ones I like. Even ones I don't like, I could see them being effective if implemented with good intensity, good range of motion, with good volume. You go home, you eat, you sleep. Presumably we're working the primary mover through a decent range of motion, but here are some ones that I call upon pretty often. We're going to start with the bench press because I can read that one the easiest. I apologize for my handwriting, but a couple of sample workouts. So first and foremost, we do our bench workout. we don't just do a little bit of benching, right? Because I think some guys, they do understand how much accessories can do for them, to the point where they've almost oversold it past specificity, where they'll just do a little bit of benching and then they'll be like, okay, now on to the accessories because I know that's where the gold is, baby. And it's like, no. It's supplemental, right? That's why we'll often call it like supplemental work. It's to supplement an already good training routine. We're trying to do enough bench pressing where we could do that only and we could still get better and better. The idea is this is supposed to further bolster our result. It shouldn't be necessary, right? Because it's like if we need our accessories to drive us forward, we probably could get away with doing more of the actual specific lift itself. Now there's a time and a place to run a lower volume routine on your main lift and kind of supplement that volume. I've mentioned I've done that on the deadlift, but it did not lead me to being the most technical deadlifter in the world. I got strong, but I'm not necessarily the best deadlifter to ever live. So a couple of workouts I like. The first one, example one, because we have 3 primary movers for the bench press, I like to sometimes have different emphases, right? So if a lifter benches 3 days a week, maybe we have one day that emphasizes the shoulders in the supplemental work, one day that emphasizes the triceps, and one day that emphasizes the chest. I believe, at least in the past, John Hack has done something like this to pretty good result. So the first one would be the example of the like chest biased supplemental session where we do some lat pull downs, mostly because I find that growing the upper back helps people get a better mind muscle connection with their upper back to have a little bit better scapular control in their bench press. I find it's a worthwhile use of time to do a little bit of pulling on your pressing days, develop those muscles, hopefully then take our specific training and really get good at creating that back tightness on the bench press. But then we're gonna do neutral grip dumbbell bench where we're rotating the dumbbells. They don't actually have to be to neutral, it could be to 45 degrees. We're gonna pull them into ourselves at the bottom, pause at the lowest point, very kind of RP Dr. Mike style, pause, drive out of the bottom. That's one of my favorite supplemental movements for anybody who's interested in developing the bench press, because for the first couple of years of training, most of us really need to just beef up our pecs. It's only later stages of development that you'll hear some guys be like, the triceps, the triceps, the triceps. Some of that's a remnant from equipped lifting, but part of that's also because very advanced benchers have done so much benching, they already have very developed pecs, their speed off the chest is there, and it's almost the triceps that can lag behind, so they'll talk about the importance of the triceps. But early on in our training, build the chest, fuck the rest, right? We're gonna do some dumbbell bench, it might be incline, it might be flat. I like rotating the dumbbells and rowing to a point that's deeper than what we could get on the barbell. I think it leads to extra development, and I also think it does create like better power off the chest. You're gonna see some carryover from it. And then we finish up with some tricep press downs. Just extra elbow extension volume to fill up that tricep maximum recoverable volume. There's a reason that so many good bench pressers have sworn by, yeah, well, I always do tricep press downs after I bench press. It's just what I do, it's what works for me. I tend to back that. I'm pretty good at bench pressing. And I attribute at least part of that to that habit that I've always had of, okay, well, once I finish benching, even if it's just tricep press downs, I'm gonna fill up my tricep volume a little bit. Example 2 would be the tricep focused workout where maybe we do a chest supported row where we're really focusing on pulling and arching into the top of that row, right? We reach at the front, really arch into the back, and we're almost training the muscles that pull us into our arch. Max likes these a good bit. We're really kind of practicing the skill of arching at the back of each rep, and it's gonna pretty closely mirror what we're doing in the bench press. Then maybe we do dips. I highly recommend if you're doing this, you do dips with a quick pause at the top of every rep. I think that holding that locked elbow position for a moment is a pivotal part of the training effect of this exercise. So if you want it to be a very helpful, and it is a very helpful supplemental motion for building up your bench press, because the better we get at benching, the more we turn the press into a decline, the more it looks like a dip. And the muscles that are associated with a good dip are gonna be associated with a pretty proficient bench press. It's one of my favorite, like, just like how we talked about the weightlifter observes back squats to kind of be this thing. Okay, we don't compete in it, but goddamn, it correlates with a good result. I find that dips are very much that way for the bench press. I think they're a great movement. And then we end with some overhead tricep extensions. We kind of already loaded the tricep in a shortened position. We're gonna load the tricep in a lengthened position. Again, we're just trying to grow a primary mover here. Nothing magical there. Maybe keep some of our overhead mobility. And then example 3 would be the shoulder focused session. We do some pull-ups. Again, just trying to work the back of the shoulder, the upper back, put on some mass there. Hopefully get better at creating back tightness and scapular control. You don't need to have a tremendously strong upper back to have good scapular control, but it makes it a lot easier, right? Just like how when we first started lifting, I told you to flex your lat and you couldn't do it. That didn't make any sense. And then once your lats developed a little bit, it became a heck of a lot easier. I find that same thing applies to creating back tightness on the bench press. Then we do some kind of overhead press. I just put overhead press. It could be seated dumbbells, could be Smith machine, just something pressing in the vertical plane. I don't think you need to do that much overhead to really develop your bench press. There's plenty of great bench pressers that just don't do much work in the overhead at all. And they don't really see a reason to because they don't see carryover. I would contest that even if there's no carryover, I would do a little bit because I find that just keeping a bit of strength in the vertical plane goes a long way in terms of keeping your shoulders healthy. Gives you a little bit of surplus of strength. And for the most part, with most of my clients, a lot of them that came to me with no vertical pressing in the program, when we started doing it a little bit and that we had that just a little bit extra preparation past what specific training will do for us, their shoulder aches and pains went away. I like having it somewhere in there. What specific you do for that vertical press doesn't necessarily matter. Now, if you see, oh, well, dumbbells, I feel it in my bench press if I'm doing dumbbell overhead or not, like I know that not all vertical presses are created equal. Some of them give me some better training effects. Go for it. I trust your observation. But on average, I don't think there's like universals, right? So then we hit some rear. We've worked the front of our delt pretty goddamn hard. We've also worked the side and a bit of the rear by doing an overhead press. Like those muscles are contracting and moving and shortening and lengthening. But that being said, they could probably handle a bit more work. We do a bit of rears, we do a bit of laterals. Cool. That's our shoulder emphasis micro hypertrophy workout after bench pressing, right? If you don't bench press 3 days a week, you could pick 2 of these if they're weaknesses. If one of them is a strength, you say, oh, my shoulders have always been pretty strong. I don't think that's the problem in my bench press. I know guys with much worse overhead presses than me who are bench pressing more than me. Maybe my shoulders aren't the problem. So maybe I'm gonna stick to only the tricep and the chest focused micro workout. Very cool. If you got 3, you may as well do all 3, unless you're really like, no, I know my triceps suck. I'm maybe gonna run through that tricep emphasis session twice a week, right? We can kind of mix and match. Deadlifts are close to me, so we'll do deadlifts next. We just have 2 little sample workouts here. The first one is we finish our deadlifting in reasonable quantities. I usually like to have most athletes for a lot of their training career, if they're a conventional deadlifter, deadlift from the floor once a week, and then do on a session either later or earlier in the week, a secondary day where they either do RDLs or stiff legs to really work on their pure hinging pattern. I think it's just worth its weight in gold to really build up the hamstrings. So maybe one of these is following deadlifts from the floor and the other is following RDLs or stiff legs. But the first one will be, we do some barbell rows. Rowing, obviously, good, big upper back tends to correlate with the ability to keep the weight in close, not get tugged forward as we initiate the pull. Rowing is a pretty range of motion specific way to build that. Barbell rows are tried and true. There's nothing magical about them, but I do like that they force you to be aware of the tightness of your midsection. A little bit of GPP for your lower back, as Bromley likes to talk about. That's a talking point that I will gladly steal. I like the terminology that like, hey, if you're a 700-pound deadlifter, rowing in the mid-3s really shouldn't be too much for your lower back. It should just be GPP if your work capacity is reasonable. Let's say we do some barbell rows. You could switch those to chest supported rows if you really can't handle it. But let's say you've identified that your weakness is more in the upper body. You're like, man, my hamstrings are pretty gnarly. I've got a good hip hinge. I've got a good squat. I think it's my upper body that's letting me down. We might double down on upper body assistance work for the deadlift. So we might go from a rowing movement straight into a vertical pulling movement to really put a lot of stress on that upper back. So maybe we do barbell rows and neutral chins. Maybe we do dumbbell rows and we do pull-ups. Something like that, right? So we really double down on that. And then we touch up the hamstrings with some hamstring curls because we can run up a bunch of volume for what is a primary mover. We're not training the specific function that's used in the deadlift, but presumably if we gain a bunch of size in our hamstrings and then go apply that to specific deadlift training, we're gonna learn to put that new tissue to use relatively quickly. And it lets us just run up tons and tons of volume, where even something like a back extension, we might be limited by the capacity to recover of our low back. We can really just put in tons and tons of volume on these hamstring curls and put on a lot of mass to what is a primary mover. Then we finish up with abs, right? Let's say we've got the reverse. You're like, I'm great at pull-ups, I'm great at rows, and my deadlift is kind of trash. I suspect it might be my lower body that's letting me down. We kind of do the reverse. Maybe we just do the dumbbell row, we touch up the upper body, and then we double down on the posterior chain training. We do glute ham raises or hamstring curls. We work the hamstring in a shortened position, and then we turn around and do some extra volume on back extensions, right? Where, okay, cool, our hamstrings are a little pre-fatigued. They're more likely to be the limiting factor rather than the low back. And we're taking that muscle, we're first training it in a shortened position, then we train it in a lengthened position. Nothing magical about that, but I like how it feels. We finish with some abs. right? Again, you can kind of identify, maybe you do one of these, maybe you do both of these, depending on how much emphasis you're placing on your deadlift. But it's just simple little workouts like this, and none of these are magical. You could take them verbatim, you could change them a little bit, but then come up with these routines. You're like, I'm not feeling like this is carrying over directly, but I notice when I do this, my quads are always sore, and I know I need to grow my quads. It's probably a good idea to get a bigger squat, to have really big quads. So maybe I'm not seeing direct carryover. That's not the most important thing in the world. If we get bigger quads, our specific training should take care of the rest. You're going to take those big quads and train them to be good at squatting relatively quickly. Because again, this is done in smaller quantities. These aren't really extensive, long workouts. They're mini workouts because you're supposed to be a bit gassed from doing one or two of the main lifts for pretty sizable quantities. These are trying to find efficient ways to then grow relevant muscles afterward, which brings us to the squat. Example one would be someone who doesn't have a good full range of motion leg machine at their gym. They've just got pretty standard equipment. Maybe we do some leg extensions, train the quad in a shortened position, pre-fatigue it a little bit so we don't have to use excessive amount of weights for our second exercise, which is going to be split squats. I really like unilateral squatting exercises. I find that you can put that back hip into extension, which can help a lot of the time with some discomfort that might be caused by lifting and never ever putting the hip into extension. Split squatting and lunging is a great way to kind of train and strengthen the hip flexor in that lengthened position. I think that they force your feet to get stronger, which is a cool slept on benefit of just having to stabilize on one foot. Your glutes, your adductors, and their phenomenal training volume for your quads. All around, I think that unilateral squatting volume is the bee's knees. I'm a big fan of it. Sometimes it can get a little bit cumbersome to hold on to heavy enough dumbbells. And that's where I sometimes do like kind of gassing myself out a little bit on some leg extensions beforehand. Because again, you could say, oh, but you lift more weight on the split squats, it's gonna carry over more. Pretty quickly, you'll get past the point where increasing your split squat's the best way to increase your squat. You're going to want just bigger legs and then apply that bigger legs to actual specific training. So I'm not overly worried about maximizing the load we're lifting on any of these accessories. I used to be in the past because I was doing less of the main lift, less of the thing that I wanted to be actually good at. So I needed to rely on the carryover from these things and pushing these things really heavy to move my main lift forward. And I did get stronger, but it wasn't the best possible result because I was not skillful, because I was not doing as much as I could in practicing the main lift. So then we do some back extensions, pretty tried and true from weightlifters, just kind of working the erectors, their ability to maintain that like relatively neutral back position we use while squatting. A little bit of extra posterior chain volume is always awesome. Finish with calves. I like calves because I think they're a very simple way to just take the ankle joint, train the surrounding muscles through a full range of motion, and have that be your ankle mobility. Because most other muscle groups, people will often quickly say, well, why are you doing static stretching? It's pretty well established that training through a full range of motion is just as, if not more effective than static stretching for improving your mobility. But they don't apply that to the ankle for some reason, and they'll do all of this passive mobility instead of doing the exact same principle they were just espousing and training the surrounding muscles through a full range of motion and having that be your mobility. So that's why I do halves. My ankles are a little junky, so I kind of have to, but I find it's an easy way to kind of keep the ankles mobile. It's just to train them. And then example two would be if you have a good machine. Maybe you do Smith machine hack squats. Maybe your leg press, it tilts back far enough that you can do really deep leg presses. That would be like a squat that's ass to grass. Maybe you have a hack squat. Maybe you have a belt squat. Just something where we can load a full range of motion, squat movement pattern, and we're not going to be limited by the lower back. I just go ham on those. I push a bunch of volume on them. I think they correlate very well with better and better results on the primary squat itself, given that we're doing a good bit of primary squatting first to just fill up what that extra bit of work our legs can do, right? Usually we stop squatting because our spine or our hips can't do much more. But then the legs are like, well, I could do probably 4 more working sets of a squat pattern. Well, you're going to make them do that. So I really like going ham on that. We don't necessarily need an exercise after that. That's going to be pretty taxing, to be honest. We could probably just say, yeah, just hit some calves and go home after that. Or we could throw in some hamstring curls. But here's a couple of sample workouts that I like. Nothing magical about these. If you got other ones you want me to cover, let me know. If you got little micro workouts you guys like to do after lifts, let me know. I'm all ears. Thank you for watching.